And I think it's interesting. So I'll show you that. There's lots more to get to. Let's get to it. First, we have to start with France. And what France is doing is trying to crack down and criminalize free speech. Texas Lindsay says new. France passed a law yesterday making criticism of mRNA shots a crime punishable by up to 3 years in prison and a fine of up to 45,000 euros. Without much attention, a law was passed in France on Wednesday, February 14th, that could criminalize resistance to mRNA treatment. Anyone who advises against our mRNA or other medical treatments that are obviously suitable for treatment based on the current state of medical knowledge can in future be imprisoned in France. Wow. Right? So anyone who advises against, right? Like, ooh, when they say safe and effective, they mean heart attacks and blood clots. Would that get me put in jail? I don't know. And like, that's concerning, right? Criticism of mRNA will be punishable in the future. So short term, they're definitely looking to make sure that when the WHO gets their new power to decide whenever a pandemic is happening and implement safeguards around the world for the pandemic preparedness or whatever it is that they're going to, however the language is going to shake out so that it sounds flowery or whatever. They don't want anybody to say this is bunk, because they want to be able to, if somebody says that and gets enough traction, they want to go in there and gonzo lira them, right? Can you use that as a verb? Yeah. Died suddenly is talking about this. Developing. France has passed a new law which will send you to jail for 3 years if you criticize mRNA vaccines or gene therapy. According to the law, which was passed quietly and secretly through the French parliament on Wednesday, advisement against mRNA or other treatments which are deemed suitable based on current medical knowledge can lead to a 3-year prison sentence and up to $48,000 fine. Article 4 of the new law, or Article Pfizer, as it's being referred to by freedom fighters in the legislature. I thought it was going to be a French thing, so that's why I was saying article weird. Is a prejudgment of alternative medicine and a threat to whistleblowers. Ominously, during what little debate was fielded before the passage of this fascist law that eliminates informed consent, warnings were parroted that the next pandemic is coming and mRNA technology is the only solution. What are they planning for the world? I think it's really obvious. Right? Like when they start kind of making signals like this, what they're planning becomes pretty clear. So just me, maybe. Dr. Kat Lindley is responding to Annie, who's talking about the French law being passed. And she says, today a law was passed in France qualifying any opposition to mRNA LMP injections as sectarian aberration. It carries a penalty of 3 years in prison and 45,000 euro fine. It will not tolerate any criticism of the therapeutic treatments which will be recommended or made obligatory by the state. Any person who dares to openly criticize these therapies will be liable to fines and imprisonment. So how do you fight that reasonably? You stand up and you say, I won't take your damn shot and I won't stop talking about it either. And if you have to go to jail for that, I mean, at this point in time, there are examples throughout history of people who have needed to go to jail for things that were absolutely wrong to make a point, right? And like at this point in time, you can't cower. You have to look them square in the eye and spit in it, figuratively. Counselor Dominique O'Rourke in Guelph is responding to Paul. Paul's talking here not about Guelph politics, about federal politics, and he says some CTV News is reporting some members of parliament, ministers, are assigned protection as security tightens. Why would security of federal ministers be tightening? Well, they locked down the economy. They made a situation where they locked down schools when it was completely unnecessary. And we knew it then, and we know it now. But they have not apologized. They've not done anything to rectify the terrible policy mistakes. And in fact, they're doubling and tripling down. And they're creating other problems, tangential being you have to deal with housing because you have to have housing. And or you know somebody who has to have housing, and things are distracting when that's a big issue. So they take you off track to make you forget and move on from the problem that is very, very a big problem and should be headlines everywhere, right? But unfortunately, we're in a situation where these parliamentarians ignore all of that, and the people who remember and get angry at them and maybe yell at them on the street or something like that, that looks like assault or something. And I'm not condoning assault. I'm not saying that you should be able to do this or anything to that effect. What I'm saying is this is indicative of a situation where usually unpopular politicians have to deal with uncomfortable questions, an angry public, being shouted down, being booed, all of that stuff. And you can't say, oh, that's hate speech. But now they've figured out a way to sidestep all of that and say that's far-right hate speech. Like anything to do with any of that, that's far-right hate speech. And I would have to say I disagree, right? And if you are creating bad policies and you're rigging the elections so that people can't actually vote you out because they don't want the bad policies that you're forcing on them, then you're putting yourself in a situation where people are going to verbally berate you. They're going to be upset with the things that you've done and they can't do anything about them. So they're going to take it out on you, right? And I think it's interesting that people are saying, oh, I'm really glad that we've got more security for these people. I'm not. I think that politicians should be able to walk down the street and be accountable to their citizens. And I mean, the citizens should be able to give honest feedback in a civilized way, right? Like you shouldn't be fearful for being assaulted or anything like that. But it's interesting that we're in a situation where security measures are being celebrated by people, including city councilors. And I just thought this turn of phrase was funny. Was not funny like ha funny, but like it perked up my red flags. I was like, this is an interesting turn of phrase. Here it is. Threats to elected officials, says Dominic O'Rourke, are threats to democracy. You may disagree with someone, their party, or their politics, but it should never be violent or prevent them from doing their job they were elected to do. So, okay, go with me on this. Here's my train of thought. If you shut down somebody's business, that is a form of an action of an aggressive action against the business. If your business makes $100 an hour, like average, right? Your daily take is blah, and that works out to $100 an hour. Let's just pretend. And somebody comes in, the city comes in and says, or the federal government or the provincial government comes in and says, you can't run that business anymore. Now the government is saying you can't run this business for arbitrary reasons. Like I can still run the business. I'm not sick. And like if somebody comes in here and is sick, I'll like Febreze or whatever, right? Like get out of here. I'm going to run my business. You're costing me my livelihood. How dare you come in here and say that? But they're committing an act of violence, an act of aggression by coming out and saying you can't do that. And so now they're saying a threat to elected officials is a threat to democracy. Are you like, did you pay attention to what you people engaged in? Are you that tone deaf? Are you that blind and deaf to the concerns of what happened over COVID and before and after? She says you can't be violent or prevent them from doing their jobs. But it's okay for the government to do that. You can't be violent, but it's okay for the government to say these vaccine mandates are something that's fine. You know, and I have a really hard time with somebody who's propagating this without the nuance, because the nuance matters quite a lot. And I mean, a threat to elected officials is a threat to democracy. I've seen Star Wars, right? Like democracy dies to thunderous applause and all that, right? A threat to democracy. Democracy needs to be, watered with the blood of patriots from now and then, right? Isn't that the phrase? I'm slaughtering it terribly, but you understand my meaning. Like democracy is a system that will, by its very nature, succumb to cronyism and insiderism and all of those isms, and it needs to be kept in check by the fact that you work for the public. The public doesn't bow down to king elected whoever, right? Or queen elected whoever. And it just seems this is on that path, right? That seems like that's the expectation. This I thought was funny. This is kind of free speechy stuff, but this is an ad on the TTC. And SixBuzz says, who's responsible for this? I don't even know what this means. It says downing a bubble tea, but won't shut down the hate. Let's end anti-East Asian racism. I am more confused now than I was before. Isn't that a racial trope? Right? Like, it is only anti-East Asian racism, or are there other kind of racisms that could have to do with bubble tea? I just don't get it. It's so crazy. So everything's wrong with everything. I just thought it was funny. This is more serious. That was kind of I just didn't get it. I may even put that on today's like poster, unless I can find something better. But it's so confusing because I just don't get it. Cosman is talking about CSIS. He says Canada's top spy agency CSIS has an anti-terrorism unit monitoring parental rights groups. A report compares those who oppose radical gender ideology to neo-Nazis, right? What? That's pretty crazy. Here's the report on that. This is from True North. Canada's top intelligence agency admits it is closely monitoring the activities of activists and groups associated with the parents' rights movement, particularly those opposing radical gender ideology. Recent reports from CBC shed light on a document from the Integrated Terror Assessment Center responsible for preventing terror activities in Canada. The report lumped together the freedom movement with extremist groups like neo-Nazis and QAnon, right? I'm going to play word association. Freedom, neo-Nazi. Okay. Like, honestly, anti-2S LGBT, blah, blah, rambling, ding dong, plus narratives remain in a common theme in violent rhetoric espoused by white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and the freedom movement. And networks such as Diagolon and QAnon. Wow. I mean, like, Diagolon and QAnon, totally made up things. Both of them completely made up things. One of them is made up by the press, and the other was made up by Jeremy Mackenzie and got conflated by the Canadian Parliament during the Freedom Convoy to be a thing that it was absolutely not. So, like, that's funny to me. It's funny. Despite the focus on monitoring such rhetoric, there was no mention in the report by CSIS regarding the violence often faced by those protesting against gender ideology. Instances of physical attacks and intimidation against parents' rights protesters have been documented, including an incident involving teenage activist Josh Alexander in Calgary. So remember the bigger girl with the knife thing, like the cut trans or turfs or something like that. I can't remember the shirt exactly. But I remember her assaulting Josh in front of police officers, and the police officers not doing a darn thing whatsoever. I think Josh got in trouble during that time. Now, she was charged after the fact, but the whole thing is being mischaracterized by CSIS to target the freedom movement, to target the people who are protesting for real objective reality. Like, there are two genders. You can't mutilate your sex organs to affirm a mental health illness, like these kind of things, right? And it's interesting how that's being misrepresented by CSIS. It should be very concerning. It's very concerning. Maybe it's more than interesting. This was supposed to go before that last story because we're going to come back to CSIS in just a second. But Jay Bhattacharya says, a month from now, on March 18th, the Biden administration will tell the U.S. Supreme Court that it needs the ability to violate the First Amendment so that it can legally control scientific discussions in online settings. So, I mean, they already are, but, right? But this is the meme account of Justin Trudeau. He's talking about the CSIS stuff as well. Parental rights advocates are neo-Nazis. It's as simple as that. That's why I've instructed Canada's spy agency to monitor individuals who believe parents have decision-making rights for their children. This is Canada. Children belong to the state. And that's Justin Trudeau's ego, the parody account, which is always makes me laugh. Here's the last little bit. The RCMP, not CSIS this time, the RCMP are slammed for private surveillance used to troll social media darknet. So they're using an app, and we've talked about this app before. It's called BabelX or BabelX, and the app pulls social media from the target, and it compiles a dossier on them, and it gives conclusions and all sorts of other stuff, or it gives it to the police, who then write a report and write their own conclusions, I'm sure. But the RCMP have been using this since 2015, so it's not surprising that during the Freedom Convoy, the RCMP and officers who were working on behalf of the government had pictures and social media posts of, like, Derek Rance, of Jeremy Mackenzie, of all of their targets, right? They had already developed, and it wasn't like a by hand, like it wasn't just officers developing their own thing looking through social media posts. There was a dedicated third party whose job was to do that and deliver the target's kind of dossier to the police. That's wild. Like, I just think that's nuts. The RCMP has been quietly using private surveillance companies to troll through social media accounts and publicly available information on the internet since at least 2015, a new report by Canada's privacy watchdog reveals. And the National Police Force is requesting the Federal Privacy Commissioner's recommendations on making their use of third-party surveillance vendors more transparent. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada found that the RCMP failed to conduct due diligence to ensure that the information they were receiving from a specific product called BabelX was legally conducted under Canada's privacy laws. It wasn't. Of course it wasn't. You expect that you put something on social media and maybe Google will index it and blah, 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 blah. Not much will happen. But instead, somebody's profiling you and they're using it against you. Isn't that weird? That seems like they shouldn't be doing that. It seems like wrong on a lot of different levels. We have to talk about a Rive scam, and there's a whole bunch of, actually, hold on a sec. I've got to reorder this a bit. We'll order it this way. Here we go. CBC Watcher highlights this video, and this is 3 times Dominic LeBlanc is asked by Dane Lloyd about whether Canadians' personal information was compromised by a Rive scan, the corruption, incompetence, and the 3 times he evades answering. So when asked a question like yes or no, was Canadian data breached during this company's use because they didn't have the security clearance they needed to work on the app anyway? Where is all this data being kept? And mum's the word, right? And he dodges and weaves, and it's very clumsy. It's like Doug Ford trying to transition, right? It's just like, dude, ouch. Here we go.
And I appreciate that going forward, Minister, but can you guarantee that Canadians' personal information was not compromised by these companies that did not have security classifications to provide cybersecurity testing on the ArriveCan app? Can you tell Canadians that their information was not compromised?
What I can tell Canadians is that our government and organizations like the Canadian Security Establishment, which would have sort of an overarching responsibility around the protection of federal IT systems, are very effective at doing everything we possibly can to protect all systems that would contain the data, personal data of Canadians. None of this work is perfect, and that's precisely why we work with allies around the world, the Five Eyes. That's precisely why this mandatory reporting will be an important
Minister,
element of that.
Are you investigating whether this possible information was compromised? Is there any investigation by your department ongoing into whether that information was compromised?
All of the circumstances around the ArriveCan app and the development of that and the role of some private contractors is being investigated. And as I say, I have every confidence that those incidents identified by the Auditor General have been corrected. Reminding the committee that in the context of those first months of COVID, there was across governments, across the country, provincial governments, I was the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, a rush to do what was necessary.
There's no excuse when Canadians' private information is put at risk. No excuse.
Okay.
No excuse. And he's trying to say we were in a real big rush. We had to get this done. Yeah, I don't think so. Larry Brock says, breaking, Auditor General confirms that she has met with the RCMP on ArriveCam. The AG discussed her findings with the RCMP and invited the cops to formally request ArriveCan files, major development in exposing corruption and potential criminality. If that's already happened, I wonder what the status is, and I wonder if everybody's just going to sweep it under the rug. What do they have? Not much. All right, this one's done too. Next scandal.
We would refer a matter to the RCMP. In this situation, I didn't have to turn my mind there, as the RCMP was already potentially looking at a matter related to contracting from the CBSA. So I met with the RCMP.
Yes.
And I talked to them in generalities about our findings because our report had not yet been made public, and so said to them once it was made public, if they would like to have access to our file to see our evidence, that they should send me a production order. We would refer a matter.
So did they send the production order? I will let you know when I know. I don't know. But I'm not holding my breath for the RCMP to come. Remember when the RCMP raided, I think it was Kathleen Wynne or Dalton McGuinty. It was Dalton McGuinty, because that's what led to Kathleen Wynne taking over. Dalton McGuinty and a bunch of his cronies, and then one guy went to jail for it, but it was like a guy down on the list, and I think he went to jail for deleting emails or something like that. Like, it didn't have anything to do with the gas scandal, but the gas scandal was supposed to be a big scandal, and Dalton McGuinty lost his premiership for it, and Wynne took over, and well, the rest is history, right? But I am not holding my breath for accountability. RCMP to come in and arrest ministers, RCMP to come in and arrest bureaucrats. We were just doing what we were told. You know, we didn't. How did we know that this would be terrible? Have you been reading the newspaper? Never mind. Wesley Hunt. Now, we're going to talk about Ukraine now, and I think that it is interesting how everybody in the West, all the leadership in the West, is absolutely aligned with their unflinching, unyielding, unending support of Ukraine. And I think that that's notable because shouldn't they work for their own citizens in their own country? Like, it would be strange if a U.S. politician prioritized Canadian politics over U.S. politics, right? But that's what they're doing with Ukrainian politics, saying that this is so important to American politics and America's interests that it deserves this high standing. Everybody all around the world. Why do we have to fight Ukraine's war? Did anybody listen to the Putin interview? They're going to try and recalibrate the news cycle to make Putin the bad guy again. They're going to try and say Putin's terrible. He's doing nuclear tests. He's doing this. He's doing that to undermine the interview he did with Tucker Carlson. That's what they're trying to do right now. But my question is, why are all these politicians so aligned with Ukraine, right? Here's Wesley Hunt, and Wesley Hunt from Texas is he's a congressman for Texas 38, okay? And why does Secretary of Defense Wesley Hunt is asking the question of the Secretary of Defense, why does the Secretary of Defense have a Ukrainian flag in his office? What are they, the 51st state? And I've said, Ukraine is obviously a province. As well, yesterday I thought Mayorkas was the Secretary of Defense, and it turns out, I believe he's the Secretary of Immigration. Sorry for getting that wrong. This guy's the Secretary of Defense, not Mayorkas. So, and somebody commented on the Canada Poly website and said, hey, that's not right. And I was like, oh, thanks for letting me know. I did not realize. I think I heard one of the talking heads talking about Secretary of Defense and then blah, 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 Mayorkas. And one was in the hospital and the other blah, blah, blah. But I've conflated them. So apologies about that. Here's Mitt Romney saying this is a threat to the reputation of your whole generation. Okay? How you're remembered right now, according to Mitt Romney, hangs in the balance. And what you do about Ukraine is the deciding factor. Here's Mitt Romney.
If we fail to help the Ukraine, we'll be known not as our fathers and mothers were, the greatest generation, but as the worst generation. If we fail to help
From best to worst. Mitt Romney, no wonder he didn't win president. He smacks his lips when he talks. And I had another clip where at the end of every sentence, he smacked his lips in a really annoying way. And I thought, can you imagine having an honest conversation with somebody and not mentioning the lip smacking or like copying the lip smacking, but then you'd feel bad? I might feel bad. Maxime Bernier is responding to Canada's further investment for Ukraine, right? Canada sent another $60 million. I showed you this yesterday. It was Bill Blair talking about here's $60 million for F-16 fighter jets. And Maxime Bernier is responding. He says, the Liberals are sending another $60 million to Ukraine for military planes with the support of the fake Conservatives. Meanwhile, our army doesn't even have basic equipment that works. Yeah, here's some planes for Ukraine. Why? This is...
being corralled.
I didn't push the button. This is... talking kind of an overview of what's going on, and I don't think it's far off, but it's a little the doom soundtrack behind it is, I don't know. I could do without that. I don't like the background music, whether it's bleeps and bloops or doom sounding or whatever, or even the Moscow subway with like the jaunty, classical music. I thought, I don't know, like this is editorializing by audio. But anyway, regardless of the doom and gloom in the background, what she's saying, I think we're watching the moves to bring to fruition what she's describing here. Here we go.
We're being corralled into this box where we either have to hate Vladimir Putin and believe everything evil that's said about him and love Ukraine, and there's no in between. And that reminds me a lot of you're either a white supremacist or you go with the Democrat narrative on everything under the sun.
The most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today, white supremacy.
And I want to understand white rage. And I'm white.
I mean, there's as much interference here as you could possibly imagine. Before you even get to Hunter Biden, Nancy Pelosi, John Kerry, Mitt Romney, and all of their children who earn millions from Ukrainian gas companies. These days, it's hard to believe anything because they've lied about COVID, they lied about Russia collusion, they lied about the Ukraine impeachment trial, and there's so much more going on in Ukraine that nobody is talking about.
Does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
My job as a...
that was one of my favorite and like funniest, but not at all. Like the whole idea of, does Ukraine have biological weapons? We can't talk about that. And then we're worried that Russia is going to get a hold of the biological weapons that are in Ukraine. But, blah, blah, blah. That whole biolabs thing and Victoria Nuland kind of being caught out like that, hilarious and terribly concerning. And I wonder what happened to that. That was years ago. And it's just disappeared into the mist, right? It's just gone, right? History is just one unending forever war, right? And Putin's the bad guy for right now, but until he's not, right? Until it's the next bad guy. So that's pretty wild. Canada briefed on intelligence. White House says concerns Russian weapons. So this is, I think, made up. This is concocted as QAnon, right? Like, here we go. Canada has been briefed on U.S. intelligence that the White House has publicly confirmed Thursday involves Russia's troubling development of an anti-satellite weapon, a senior government official told Global News. The official spoke on background to confirm that the briefing on intelligence that has yet to be declassified by the United States. First, this is not an active capability that's been deployed, and through Russia's pursuit of this particular capability, and though Russia's pursuit of this capability is troubling, there's no immediate threat to anyone's safety, Kirby said. They're just terrible. It's like GoldenEye. It's like a GoldenEye satellite, right? We're not talking about a weapon that can be used to attack human beings or cause physical destruction here on Earth. Okay, it's not even GoldenEye. So it's not even GoldenEye. And they're like, ooh, Russia bad. Yeah, sure. I just don't believe it. It's just one of those, another quiver in the arrow of they're trying to vilify Russia and make the Russia narrative overtake have you seen the Moscow the Moscow train station? Super nice, right? Like, it's competing narratives, and their narrative is going to get all the airtime, and Tucker Carlson's going to be on X. And who's going to win? Well, how long is the time frame, right? Because day 1, day 3, Tucker. 3 weeks from now, they're going to still be talking about their Russia bad narrative, and they'll be mobilizing things, and they'll be cracking down on free speech, so Tucker won't be able to publish his show. So who's winning, right? But I think in the long run, really, there are a bunch of people who are talking about how they can't maintain this. It's not maintainable because people don't believe it anymore. And so that's interesting. But all of that said, it's much deeper than you think. The truth is much stranger than you think, I believe. Toronto Morning is talking to Pierre Poilievre, and Poilievre says Trudeau has made Canada weak, poor, and defenseless. Poilievre is going to make great points here. He makes great points. When he becomes prime minister, all of these points get applied to Ukraine, and he's going to strengthen Canada's army, maybe send Canadians to Ukraine to help out or something like that. But he's all on board with the Ukraine stuff. Like, he just sent the $60 million to Ukraine for the F-16 jets. So just so you're aware, like, while this sounds fine, like, sure, rebuild Canada's military, I worry that we're going to be sending our Canadian military rebuilt to Ukraine to die against Russia for no good reason at all. So, I hope not. I hope I'm wrong. But here's Poilievre answering questions about our military, and I think by extension about how his foreign policy will look. We'll see. Here we go.
Poilievre, you've said that, or your office has said you plan to work towards meeting the NATO defense spending target if you are elected. The Liberals have said that too. How is your approach going to be different?
Thank you. First of all, Justin Trudeau has made Canada weak, poor, and defenseless. His plan for national defense is to rely on Joe Biden or Donald Trump to protect Canada. That puts America in charge of Canada's future. I don't want that. I want to bring home control of our country and our defense. My common sense plan will cut wasteful foreign aid that goes to dictators, terrorists, and multinational bureaucracies and put that money into reinforcing our military. Bring our money home. 2, we will cut back office bureaucracy and use the savings to bolster frontline resources for our soldiers, sailors, and airmen. 3, we will get rid of the corruption and incompetence in our procurement. We are wasting billions of dollars profiting these defense contractors that should be used to get the best value for our troops and our taxpayers. In other words, a common sense plan to bring home our sovereignty, our strength, and reinforce our military.
Sounds good, right? Sounds like a plan that could be practical and make our military stronger. If our military is used to do what a military is traditionally designed to do, and that is defend the citizens, defend the border, the sovereignty of the country, then great. But again, I worry that we're rebuilding a military to be sent off to fight somewhere that's not our war for reasons that are not above board. Tamara. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful